Hey there guys, we're taking a look at Assassin's Creed Origins running on the AMD Ryzen 5 5500U. Now the game is currently running at 1080p with the lowest in-game graphical settings and the adaptive quality set to a target FPS of 30. Now with these current settings, the level of performance that we're getting isn't amazing, but it's relatively playable for the most part. And I really think it just comes down to the fact that those 16 gigabytes of RAM are really putting in some work right now, because those 1% lows don't deviate that far from the average, though that mostly comes down to the fact that our average isn't exactly that high. But it is at a level of performance where I think most people would be perfectly fine if they didn't have the FPS counter and they were just left alone with the game. But it's definitely not the most ideal situation, and I can understand if you'd like to squeeze out some more performance than this. But overall, just in terms of 1080p performance, this is actually pretty solid, though obviously it's not the most ideal situation. 900p does give us a nice little boost here, though it's nothing spectacular, but it is enough at least to get the 1% lows to be at around that 30 FPS mark. But again, it's really not that big of a boost. I was hoping to see a little bit more of an uplift for 900p, but really it mostly just rounds out the experience, where I think this is going to be very ideal because this is pretty much going to be a consistent 30 FPS average for the most part. You'll occasionally have moments where things will dip down, but it is not going to be anywhere near as bad as full 1080p was. That said though, I can also understand if this still isn't enough performance for you, but really there's not much more we could squeeze on out of here. Though dropping down to 720p should be a noticeable performance uplift, at least hopefully, and we'll see that right now. Well, I was actually genuinely surprised to see how well 720p was doing. I was expecting it to be just a small little uplift compared to 900p, but it is noticeable enough that I think this becomes a far more playable experience. Though you'll still see that the frame times aren't exactly the most consistent. We've definitely seen flatter lines in this. This is definitely a lot of up and down spikes, so it's not going to be the greatest overall experience, but it should be enjoyable enough for most people. Really though, the biggest takeaway that I have is that a lot of these games really just need 720p. 900p and 1080p a lot of times will not give you enough performance to really justify playing at those resolutions. But obviously, as good as the in-game benchmarks are for these games, you really won't know how it'll perform until you jump into some actual gameplay, so let's do that right now. So jumping into the actual game, the performance that we're getting here is kind of all over the place. It really depends on what it is that you're doing. If you're kind of just roaming around in interior areas, the FPS will be more in the 40s to 50 range, but it can definitely dip down into the 20s, and it can be pretty rough and jarring sometimes. But I think that for the most part, you should be able to at least get used to this. Definitely not going to be the most ideal situation, but overall, I think most people should be perfectly fine with this, and I would still consider this to be more than playable. It's just not going to be the most ideal experience, and if you've played these games on more modern consoles, then you're going to be disappointed with the level of performance that you're going to be getting out of this. But you gotta remember that this is essentially just a $500 system that this is running on, and considering the fact that you get a whole laptop out of this that can play these kinds of games, I think that this is overall a win. But anyways, I want to thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.